let's go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us, even after a couple of technology hiccups. Hopefully, we won't get too off track, but we're thankful that you're here, and feel free to use the chat or just interrupt us as we go so we can have more of a conversation with everyone today. So welcome to our session. I'm Lindsay Fazio. Today we're going to talk about connection, so feeling isolated or marginalized in your program or professionally, and we're going to talk about strategies to build a community with your colleagues. One of the best parts of being at the forum is the people. So as I said, I'm Lindsay Fazio. I'm the Director of Behavioral Science and Physician Wellness at North Shore University Health System, the University of Chicago. Limor?
I am Limor Gildenblatt, and I am the Behavioral Health Faculty at Saints Mary and Elizabeth at Amita Health in Chicago, Illinois.
And I'm Mary Talen. I'm on my third residency in Chicago. I'm now at Resurrection Family Medicine Residency Program.
And I am Adrienne Williams. I am the Director of Behavioral Science and Associate Professor at University of Illinois at Chicago Family Medicine.
Oh, I didn't know that.
This is our amazing team. So we're gonna, if you go on to the next slide, we don't have any disclosures or anything to report. And hopefully by the end of our hour together, you will be able to identify strategies to develop and maintain your own professional community wherever you're joining us from, recognize the benefit of these collaborative relationships, and also understand some networking and relationship building opportunities at home. If you go to the next one, thanks. So today, while, as we were thinking about putting this presentation together months ago, we really, I don't think, anticipated the impact or the importance of us talking about connections and community. 2020 has kind of been a disaster, maybe lots of stressors and difficulty that we really did not anticipate, as I said. Now more than ever, building and staying connected to one another is crucial to both our individual well-being, but also our professional well-being. In addition to the numerous pandemic stressors, the battle to avoid and reduce burnout is ever present for family medicine educators. So today we're going to talk about a way to protect ourselves by creating connections. So on the screen, you'll see two different images. I'm going to start with the more concentric circle looking one. And this is an image from IHI, which many of you may be familiar with, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. This is from their white paper, the Joy and Work Model. So IHI has taught us that there are 9 critical components to creating joy in work, which leads to happy, healthy, and productive people. So for purposes of our conversation today, we're going to pull out one of those domains, which is around camaraderie and teamwork. So camaraderie and teamwork domain speaks to the need for social cohesion, productivity in teams, a shared understanding, and also fostering trusting relationships with each other. And while I'm hopeful that everyone joining us today has these connections in their own program, if not, also, and many of us are in really amazing programs, but also just creating your own camaraderie outside of your program with other like-minded professionals can also be very protective. IHI even says in one of the other domains, which is around recognition and rewards, while those are important also for creating healthy, productive people, without the camaraderie and the trusting relationships, it's just a party and a plaque. So the other image that you'll see on the screen is a framework called the 5 C's of community, which include collegiality, conscientiousness, communication, continuity, and commitment. And this framework was originally developed to promote connectedness in interprofessional teams, specifically in biomedical research. But our group has found the same framework helpful in guiding our principles around building community groups where we're connected to one another, we share goals, using inclusive language, mutual respect of one another, as well as offering support and consultation. So hopefully, if you're interested in either of these frameworks, there's more information and the references are later in our slide deck. All right, so if we move on to the next slide. So in preparing for our talk, thinking about what isolation is and feeling marginalized, I often find myself reflecting on how very different the experience of the behaviorist versus our physician colleagues might be in the educational worlds we live in. So at times I've thought of my role as a behaviorist as almost living on an island in a sea of physicians around me, where we speak different languages. We come from different backgrounds and training, from the biopsychosocial model to the medical model. And while all of this creates this perfect harmony, there are differences that we bring to the table. Other factors that are different and maybe not always openly discussed that contribute to isolation is some of the economic differences in pay. There's a very different pay structure between our physician faculty and the behavioral science faculty. This difference was highlighted in a publication last year. Other things that contribute to some of these differences are the hierarchies in traditional medicine and medical training, as well as microaggressions that occur in our teaching environments. For example, I don't know if you've had this experience as I have, where I'll be referred to as Lindsay, where my physician faculty will be referred to as Dr. So-and-so. So there's lots of ways that these things play out in our environment. And as I said, all of these come together to create a nice harmony that contributes to successful training of really amazing physicians, but still contribute to some of that isolation. Mary, would you take us next into how our group got started?
Sure. So let me give you a little bit of background about how the ebb and the flow of our connection.
It's really close. Look at how close that is.
Can you hear me? So I moved to Chicago 12 years ago, and I had left my grounding with my Ohio colleagues, and I was well connected with a psychology group there. But in moving to Chicago, of course, I kept my connections with my STFM, CFHA, and Families in Family Medicine group that were really such an important part of my professional development. But coming to Chicago, realizing that the local kind of grounding was not there. I was so lucky, though, to have Maria Devins, who was at the University UIC, and she just embraced me, brought me out for lunch, where she was the person that I could go to, that I could have a face-to-face with and say, I'm swimming, I don't know what's going on here. How do I work this system? And from that, we really started to branch out to the other behavioral science faculty people in our local community. So Rhonda Faulkner, Steve Rom, Tony Atkins, Jose Nino became part of our group, and Kay Levine. All were part of this initial group. And from the forum, having our lunches together at the forum was like, let's go team, we got to get together. And we did that for maybe 5 years, where we would rotate to each other's residency. We would have an agenda, and we would almost always get off that agenda and just take the time to talk about these rich and varied experiences that we had, and supporting each other through that. Having that kind of shared experience was just amazing. But then we had some very tragic things happen. Maria died from a long battle with cancer. We lost Kay Levine, retired, Steve Rom retired. We had changes in organizations. People had different positions that they were taking in their organization. So there was a shifting that happened that really stretched our ability to connect with each other. We ended up, Jose and I would meet regularly for lunch, but it was just the two of us and kind of reaching out to a few other people, but it wasn't the kind of group cohesion that we had in our earlier phases. And I think that ebb and flow of being able to We contracted, we expanded, and then we contracted again, and finding ways that our membership can weather these kinds of shifts as our organizations and now COVID has come into the mix. So we want to share with you what this has done in our new expanding phase of our Chicagoland Consortium. Lindsay?
Thanks, Mary. So like Mary, I am at my third family medicine residency program. And so how we came to be then, Mary is our historian and has 13 years ago, people started getting together in the Chicago area. My first program was in Indiana, and I see several behaviorists from Indiana on the line. So that's exciting to see you guys. So about 12 years ago, we thought, why are we all over the state and yet we don't talk to each other that much except for at conferences? We really should get together more often and share information and support each other in curriculum and all of this. So at the time, 12 years ago, 7 of us started meeting. Now there are 14 programs in the state of Indiana. At that time, there were much fewer. So it was about 80% of the behaviorists in the state would get together once a quarter. And we shared lectures, had delicious food, problem solved. And then I moved again to my second program and started looking for my people and where was my network that I had had this fantastic experience in Indiana. Started to put together another consortium in Indiana. And then we moved again. And thankfully, I've always been able to land in family medicine education. And shortly after I got here, started looking for the people, places, and things again. And that's when we reignited, I guess you could say, the Chicago Behavioral Science Consortium. Limor is going to tell us a little bit more about our structure and our maintenance so that you too can build these community networks at home.
Thank you, Lindsay. So like these other ladies, I'm also on a third residency, though Mary has a couple more under her belt, I think like from Ohio. But, you know, over the last few years, at least in my residencies, I was so hungry for behavioralist people. And so when I got this email from, so basically kind of similar to what Mary said, you know, at these forum conferences, we'd always say, let's get together as a group. And it just never happened, at least in the last couple of years, because we just all got so busy. And so I was so grateful when Lindsay had reached out to all of us in the summer of 2019. And we decided, let's do this, let's get back together. And we tried to kind of collect everyone we could collect that wasn't retired or not wanting to be part of our meetings. And we decided, let's go ahead and meet quarterly in addition to the forum or other conferences we might be at. It sounds like from other presentations, Fridays seemed to be a good time for behavioralists to connect. That was where we matched up the best. So what we started doing in the beginning was we said, let's block a half day Friday. We'll get together at someone's residency and do this rotation. So we were able to do this in August in my residency, which is where Mary Talen is now. And then in December, we went to Mary's old residency. And then in March, we were supposed to go to Lindsay's, and of course, COVID hit. So we'll talk a little bit about how that shifted for us. And as Lindsay mentioned, it's always great to have food when you can connect with your colleagues. And so I was able to, you know, talk to my medical director and say, hey, I'm hosting colleagues. Can you guys cover this from our program? And people will be really willing, you know, to kind of help with that stuff. So if you can feed each other, that's always a pro. We like food. So in terms of the structure and maintenance, you know, again, similar to probably how it was when Dr. Talen was doing this back a few years ago, we would email prior to our meetings and we would talk about agenda items, which we did stick to, I think, in our first meeting a little bit more than our second based on where we were at. But I remember like Tony Atkins printed his wellness curriculum and we were kind of handing it out to each other. So it was really helpful for us to have an agenda. But I remember at our meeting at Mary's residency, like we were all just kind of doing intros. That's when Adrienne joined us. And it just, we met where we needed to meet that day and it was a little bit more organic. But we of course connected in between these meetings via email or calls about any upcoming presentations we were doing. We had started a Google Share Drive to make it easier to share information. I think that halted a little bit with COVID, but we're hoping to kind of get back to that. In terms of our current members, we have 9 members, 8 behavioralists, and 1 physician colleague who's at a residency program who's behavioral oriented. So we're always, it's an open group. We're always happy to have anyone that wants to be a part of this. And then in person, before COVID, we were able to meet about 5 or 6 people. And I think what's been really cool is just that there have also been different systems represented. We actually have a representative from each of the family medicine residencies at Amita Health, which is really awesome. And just kind of learning the ins and outs of other systems and what is allowed and not allowed has been really useful to us. In addition, in the last year since we started back up with this group, or last year and a half, we've had some movement within residency programs. And without being in constant contact, we probably wouldn't have known of these upcoming openings or just kind of help support each other through, leaving a residency is really tough during the pandemic and starting in a new place. And so we've really been able to kind of help each other with some of these career developments or opportunities. And then in terms of COVID, it was really good to hear in a lot of presentations that a lot of people, or like I know Florida, for instance, and some other areas have had groups like this that really leaned into each other when COVID hit. And that's exactly what happened to our group. Even though we weren't able to meet in person at Lindsay's residency in March, what we did decide in April was let's go ahead and meet every other Friday, 10 a.m. just for an hour. It was a little bit probably harder than to block a half a day with the Zoom fatigue and all that, but it was a really useful hour that we kept up for a few months every other week just to talk about anything that came up, how to run support groups with residents, how we were doing emotionally, how our residents were doing, and just share different resources for teaching over Zoom and things like that. And then in August, a few months later, a few of us started going back into work physically, and I think kind of COVID became our new norm. And so we decided to go ahead and shift to monthly Zoom meetings. And so we still try to meet every month, once Friday mornings, for an hour. And so our future goal, of course, when things are safe, is to get back in person and keep that rotation going. And now I'm going to pass it along to Adrienne.
All right, so for this next section, what we're going to be talking about is what strategies you can actually use for so that you can develop your own community. So the first thing that would be the most obvious one would be to try to join an existing community. So if you are already in an area, if there is an existing community, you might want to try that. So when so like the other presenters, I am also on my 3rd residency, but I also am living in the 7th state that I've moved to a lot of different states. And so in coming to Chicago, I was also coming from another state. And I met up with some people at the forum that I knew also lived in Chicago, and I was able to join one of the lunches that people did at the forum. And so because of that, I was then invited to be able to be a part of this consortium. And as was mentioned, I was able to join this consortium just in like December of last year. And so that allowed me to join this established community. But that's not going to be the case in a lot of places. And so we want to give you a lot of other strategies that are going to help you to build a community. The first thing that you might want to do is to look into any kind of fellowship alumni groups. So while this is not geographically located, this can help in the sense of feeling isolated. So if you completed any kind of a fellowship, this could have been a formal postdoctoral fellowship, which many people have completed one of those fellowships in health psychology or in primary care. Or if you are a member of BFEF, that is a fantastic alumni group that a lot of people stay in touch with and is a great way of creating a sense of community. Now, before moving to Chicago, I was living in Baltimore. And one of the things that started there was that the Society for Health Psychology, which I am a member of, I was on the Early Career Psychologist Council at that time. And because of the same issue, and there were no established community groups in Baltimore. So what I did as a result was that in my role of Society for Health Psychology, I created this local networking event. And we had the first one there in Baltimore, and then we had the second one here in Chicago, and I hadn't even lived here yet. This networking event has actually kind of blown up, and they are now being held sometimes twice a year in different cities across the nation. So if you are a member of Society for Health Psychology, or if you know anybody else who is a member of Society for Health Psychology, be on the lookout for any of their local networking events, because those usually take place at like pizza places or at local bars or things like that. And you can go there, and that is where you can find other people to network with. As has already been identified, going to the forum is a great place to just identify people. And I will come back to later how you can, a specific strategy for how to actually approach people at the forum. When we are talking about conferences, I have a list here of a bunch of different conferences, starting with the forum, because you're obviously already here. Now, these conferences and organizations are places where you will be able to find lots of different people who you'll be able to network with. Many of you may not know what these all stand for. I just have the acronyms up here, but what we have is, if you do download this PowerPoint, the PowerPoint actually has the full name of each of these organizations and a link to their website so that you can start looking into each of these organizations. Okay, can we go back real quick? One thing I did want to say about these organizations, I did only include organizations for psychologists and social workers, because that is who makes up the majority of people likely in this session. We recognize that there are physicians, of course, at the forum, but because this specific presentation is on being isolated and marginalized within a sea of physicians, we did want to really focus on how to set up a community for people who do not identify as physicians or who are not trained as physicians. Next slide, please. All right, so once you go to these conferences, what can you actually do to build a community while you are at the conference? So if you are at the conference in person, try to get at least one business card. So I started this practice a while ago, that if I went to any session, if there was somebody who spoke up, or somebody who was one of the presenters, or somebody who I met was sitting next to me during a presentation, I started to get at least one business card per conference. Also, many conferences, including the forum, sometimes will include an attendance list. So if you go to things like APA, then like I said, the forum has done this, they actually just include an attendance list in the program. So what I started doing in the other cities where I lived in is I would just review those attendance lists and find out if there was anybody there from my city. I may or may not actually have met those people at the conference, but then I started to know, well, here's a person who is at this conference who has a similar interest to me and will be able to connect because they are in the same city. So then you would want to follow up by phone or by Zoom meeting 2 to 4 weeks later. This is if you actually met the person. If you didn't meet the person, I would start with an email and to introduce myself. 2 to 4 weeks later is recommended, because if you email as soon as you get back from the conference, usually people are really overwhelmed and they haven't been checking their emails and they haven't been keeping up on their work. So as a result of that, it's recommended that you contact a person 2 to 4 weeks later, but that you do actually, even if that initial connection is by email, that you follow up with a phone or a Zoom meeting. Don't just make an email connection. And I've seen this error happen a lot of times, including when people have contacted me after going to a conference. So people will send me an email to be like, hey, it was great to meet you. I hope we can speak again. And then I never hear from that person again. And that is very easy to do when you are just sending an email. So making sure that you do follow up with a specific phone or Zoom meeting, and then at that phone or Zoom meeting, scheduling a follow-up meeting, because a lot of times because community, of course, is going to require regular contact, and that follow-up meeting doesn't need to be immediate. It can be anywhere from 3 to 6 months later. And next slide. So the next thing that you can do is to build community through email solicitation. So this is also a strategy that I have tried. So you would look up other programs in your area and find people on their websites. Email that person and ask for a specific meeting. If there is not a response, follow up with a phone call. So I will give an example here. Actually, my first job out of fellowship was actually through using this technique. I looked up a bunch of programs that were in the cities where I wanted to live, and I sent cold letters and emails to the people who were there, and those and with a letter just being like, look what I can do. I want to come to your place. And that is actually how I got even my first job, was just using this strategy. So it does actually work. Now you might need to send out a lot of emails for this strategy to work, but even if you make a connection with just 2 to 3 people, that is usually sufficient. Next slide, please. And the next thing is to try to build a community through an event. And so this one is one that I also tried when I was in Baltimore, which was to create my own event with the people and advertising it among the people that I felt would be the people that I need to connect with the most. So what I did with this event was I arranged something with a local bar, asked if we could have an event. I directly invited people from different programs in the area. So I sent out an email to some of the different residencies in the area and some of the different training programs. It was posted on social media, and then it was posted on some of the listservs through professional organizations. And when I contacted the leaders of the different programs in the area, I said, hey, can you just, we're having this networking event. Can you please post this to your institution's listserv? And we ended up getting a bunch of people coming to this networking event. And because I was the one that had organized it, I ended up meeting a ton of people because it was just a gathering at a local pizza place or a bar. People were already willing to do that. And so there wasn't a whole lot of things that, we had to pay out of pocket or anything like that. And even if you only get a smaller group, you still will end up meeting a core group of people. Next slide, please. Now, once you have met a few people, you will need to maintain that community. And that is where I usually see things starting to fall off. The first thing that you want to do is to identify shared needs. So if you're just meeting and you're just getting background demographic information, like, hey, where are you from? Are you married? Do you have any kids? Like, that's going to fizzle out very quickly. So if you identify shared needs, and then you start to figure out how you can meet each other's shared needs. Identify any obstacles and challenges that people are having in their professional lives, so that then collaborating together and continuing to connect ends up being a motivation. Then identify the specific ways to connect. So are people going to connect by phone meetings? Are they going to have in-person meetings? Now are we going to have Zoom meetings? As was mentioned before, we've gone through several of those at the Chicago Consortium. And so, but some of them are just like, hey, I just want to talk, and like once a month. And right now I do have a person that I had met like 3 states ago that we continue to have we schedule a monthly talk just on the phone, even though they live in a different state. And then it is very important, of course, to set up the goals for follow-up. So making sure that you are meeting no less than quarterly. When people meet less than quarterly, that tends to be when these kinds of connections start to fizzle out. But when something is quarterly, it becomes much more of a regular part of your life and a part of your social network. Now, next, I'm going to turn it over to Mary to discuss for the discussions. Mary, you're muted.
So everyone, thank you for your chats. And I know that Florida, North Carolina, and Michigan are all kind of saying what you're doing, and that is great. And you are people that have been part of my larger community, and I'm so grateful that you all are here. What we want you to do is to break up into groups according to your time zone. And we have identified, our core time zones, and you can select to put yourself in one of those time zone small discussion groups. What we'd like you to do is spend time for the next 10 minutes or so, 8 to 10 minutes, to talk about challenges that you faced with trying to make connections, and to talk about what's been successful. What have you found that works over time with the different struggles and demands on your time? So can we hear from each group? If you can just, if somebody can be a spokesperson and say, what did you get from spending a little time together? What stood out? What's your next step? Can we hear from, let's hear from the Eastern time folks first.
I can share. I actually got a ton from our little breakout. I have some people, a few different people to reach out to. I'm in Michigan, and a few of the people in my breakout knew some people that I should contact here. And also looking into the fellowship, that was another big recommendation for me. Not to mention that it was just really nice to meet some people here and start to get to know people. So it was awesome. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Lacey, Michigan has historically really amazing behaviorists. So some of the big founders in STFM, and so Amy, the two Amy's, Amy Odom, Amy Romaine, and also Tom Bishop are in Michigan, and they are really like pillars in our field. So
they've
great.
got the history. They've
And
been
Mark Vogel is also there.
right. They've been
Heather
around the block a
Kirkpatrick.
few times.
I also wanted to give a shout out to her comment on the fellowship. The Behavioral Science Fellowship also places us by region as well. So my group was made up of people in my region, and all the groups were made up that way. So I highly recommend that to anyone considering getting connected. It's a great fellowship program.
I will, I mean, I can't say enough about the fellowship, but one of the things we did talk about too is that regional is great, but a lot of the connections that I made in the fellowship are not regional, and they're the ones on my speed dial because of our affinity for each other. So, you know, regional, you do need those connections, but also just be open to those people that you feel that affinity for in meetings. Someone makes a comment and you're like, oh, I resonate with that. Those are people that you can seek out and just chat with in the hall or on a breakout room. And sometimes those become some of your best colleagues.
I need to throw in a comment about this. I mean, I have been at the forum for over 30 years, and the people that these are my go-to folks, and the ones that have retired are still my go-to folks. And I think that's been a hard part of thinking about retiring is, what am I going to do about losing? Am I going to lose contact with these people? So what you start now is part of your professional development that will take you through your career and beyond. So nurture these relationships, stick with them. They are life-sustaining in so many ways. So can we hear, Pacific time zone, can we hear from you?
So Christine and Barb and I met for Pacific. I'm not sure if there was somebody in the other group. I'm still new to this. I've been doing this for less than a year, and I was mandated to do it by the Air Force. So I had a lot of questions, and I was, so I'm in the position of kind of like seeking mentorship, I guess, realizing this is the best gig I've ever had. How can I do this forever once I get out of the Air Force? I have some agency over my life. So I'm thankful to the two others in my group who were able to share some wisdom.
Fantastic. And again, maybe the fellowship would be a really good way to kind of build your community and your skill set and confidence and everything that goes with that. Terrific.
I think we're going to get together too. So we're going to follow up on our little meeting.
Yeah, wonderful. And our last group is Southeast, is that, or
Central?
Central time.
Kyle, we're going to pick on you. I'm just kidding.
Well, we had lots of people from all over. I just recently moved, as you guys all heard, and one of my my friends from another program in Springfield area was there. So it was nice to be able to connect with them. I think they had talked about doing some regional things. There's some people in some isolated states like Oklahoma and Kansas and things like that. So they had considered doing a regional possible meetup. Zoom, we talked a lot about Zoom, how, prior to COVID, none of us would probably enjoy using that as a way to connect, but now it's almost a preferred way because we can be from almost anywhere. I'm sitting in my bed right now because my back hurts. So, we can be almost anywhere to connect, which is great. And I think, it was just nice to be able to see other people and be connected with all of them.
Yeah, that's great. So thank you all. Is there, if anybody has any other comments or things they want to post on in the chat room, please feel free to do that as we wrap it up. I think that connection, the time that you just talk to each other, and even if it is Zoom, we are figuring out ways to feel like we have a community. And Zoom actually frees up our barriers around some time elements and travel issues. So let's take what we can. And I hope that this will give you a way that you can share contact information, that you follow up the way Adrienne said. Please don't just follow up with an email, follow up with a phone call, follow up with a scheduled meeting. Make this part of your new reality of your go-to folks, because that's what happens at the forum. And we hope that we help to bring more of that conversation together so that people can continue to have these kinds of conversations.
I just want to make one last comment too, Mary, that, one of our slides said something about we're never too busy for this. It's not about not having time, it's about prioritizing. We are all split in so many directions at our residencies. So I would really encourage you all to make this protected time. Like I make my Fridays times that I kind of control a little more with connecting with colleagues. So plan this and don't try to run to interviews and other places from it if you can help it. I know we can't always, but this is a priority that you deserve.
Absolutely. And especially this experience of being I have been the only psychologist in most of my settings, and realizing like, I don't know, I'm almost scared to connect with other mental health people because I feel like I have been co-opted into another world. So, but it's so great to be part of this group because we are living in two different cultures, and to be able to have people understand that shift that we're constantly making is heartwarming and secure and affirming, especially when you're losing all kinds of confidence and challenged that way. So
we also have our evaluation in the chat, so we would love for you to just take a quick minute before you grab lunch to give us some feedback. We would appreciate that. Thank you all for coming.